In this video, I'm going to show you how to do APA documentation for a website and also how to do in-text citations for various purposes. Now, when you're doing documentation in APA, just like in MLA, it all starts with the author. And with the number of authors, it also determines what your in-text citation is going to look like. So let's say you have an author for a website, just one author. When you're trying to document an online website, and remember this is not the same as a database source, but for an online website, the basic format looks like this. You start with the name, and you go with the last name, comma, and then the first initial of the author's name. Next, you're going to follow that up with the year of publication, in parentheses. After the year, you'll write the title of the article. When you write the title of the article, you're going to only capitalize the first word and any proper nouns. So for instance, in this title here, I've only capitalized the first word and any proper nouns that occur. After that, you type out the name of the website. In this case, you'll go with proper capitalization because the name of the website is going to be a proper noun. And you will write that in italics. The last part is the URL. You'll write the words retrieved from and then give the website address that you used. So here's the basic format for one author. And this is the basic format you'll use for any website. Now let's say I use this source in my essay as I'm writing and I want to document it. Just remember, you have to document whether you put the content in your own words, which is paraphrasing, or if you use a word-for-word quote. Now the thing with APA that's different from MLA is that when you're using a quote versus paraphrased content, you have to actually document it slightly differently. In your citation, you're going to start with the last name of the author. And both of them start the same. Next, you'll put a comma and then the year of publication. Now the difference occurs here. If you've paraphrased it in your own words, you can actually end your citation right there. But if you quote it word for word, you then have to give the exact location of where that quote exists. Now, if you're reading a book or an ebook, or you have a PDF and it has the page numbers on it, then you have to give a page number if page numbers exist. And you do P period, and then you can give the page number. Then you can end your documentation. However, if you don't have page numbers because you're using a website, you then have to give the paragraph number instead. And you can end your documentation. Another thing that's different with MLA versus APA is you'll notice that the punctuation inside the documentation is also different. In MLA, you'll see the use of commas in certain cases. Here, it's always a period after each part. So make sure you also have proper punctuation when you're building your documentation. Now, if your source has two authors, you have to list them both. And you'll do that in the same way with the last name, comma, first name both times, like this. So if you have two authors, it's last name, first initial, period, comma, the ampersand, and then Roberts, comma, R, period. So you have both names listed. Everything else in the documentation is going to be exactly the same. When you do the in-text citation, if there are two authors, you have to list them both. But you don't include their first initials. If it's a quote, you have to give a location, either page or paragraph number. If it's paraphrased, you don't have to give a location, but you still give both authors. Here is where the rules get a little more complicated. APA has a rule specifically for a case where you have 3, 4, or 5 authors, exactly as the authors of your source. If you have 3, 4, or 5 authors, you have to list all of their names on your reference for your documentation. So in this case, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 authors exactly on my source. So I have to list all of them, last name, comma, first initial, period, continuing on until I get to the very end. Before the last one, I'll put the and sign. Everything else in the citation is the same. The first time I use this source with 3, 4, or 5 authors in it, in my essay, I have to name all of them in the in-text citation. So it's going to be a long citation, but that's the way it's supposed to be if you have 3, 4, or 5 authors. You give all of their names. Those names are then followed by the year, and then, if it's a quote, a location. If it's paraphrased, no location. Now, if I use the same source, again, somewhere else in my essay, because I've listed all of the author's names one time, I don't actually have to list them all a second time. All I have to do is list the first author's name, and then for the rest, I'll put in the abbreviation ET space AL, which means and the rest. And then I give the rest of the information. So the first time I use a source with 3, 4, or 5 authors, I have to list all of them in my in-text citation. If I use that source again later on, I get to abbreviate because I've done the work already one time. From there, there's a way to handle 6 or 7 authors. If you have 6 or 7 authors that created the source, in the citation on the references page at the end of your paper, the first thing you have to do is list all of them, just like with the 3 through 5. So if it's 6 or 7 exactly, you have to list all of their names. Once you've listed them all out, 6 or 7 authors, the rest of the citation is the same. However, once you get to 6 or more authors, when you do your in-text citation, you don't have to list them all. You get to abbreviate immediately, just like you did up here. So if there's 6 or 7 authors, I only use the first one in the citation. I use the ETAL, and then I give the year, and then if it's a quote, the page number. Oops. And if there's no quote, then I don't have to give a location because I paraphrased it in my own words. For my documentation, if there are more than 7 authors, you will list on the references page, documentations, authors 1 through 6, and then the last one on the list. So here I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, ... and then a final author. The ... indicates I didn't list everything between Jones and Wales. So if there were 20 authors on the source, and that's totally possible with a sciences report, then the authors are listed as author number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, ... number 20, the last one on the page. Everything else on the citation is the same. When you do your in-text citation, you follow the rule for 6 or more. So you get to use the ETAL abbreviation. Now, how do you deal with a case when there's no author listed? So if there's no author, in MLA, what you would usually do is you would go with the next part. But you never start with a year when you're making an APA documentation. So the year always goes in place number 2. So if there's no author, I'm going to start with the title, and the year is going to stay in spot number 2. For your in-text citation, it follows the same rules as MLA. You put the title in quotes in your documentation, and you only write up to the first noun or noun phrase. You don't write the entire title unless the title is only 3 or 4 words. So if it's really short, then it's okay. So when I write my in-text citation dealing with the title here, I start with the first word, but that is not a noun, so I'll keep on going until I get to the end of the first noun or noun phrase. In this case, red tide is a phrase. It's one thing. So I'm going to stop there. I don't have to write the rest of the title at this point. Then I'm going to give the same information I usually do. The year, and if it's a quote, a location. If it's paraphrased, no location required. What if you've got a source and there's no year listed? In this case, you don't leave it out. You have to put in a placeholder for that spot. So if you have a source that has no date, you put N period D period in that spot, which means no date. When you create your citation, you'll put this abbreviation in for the year spot. So you can't leave out the year. If there's no date, you have to make sure that that's recognized. Now, just like with MLA, there are two different ways you can document something. You can either use a citation like this, or sometimes we prefer just to write the name of the author directly into the sentence. Like if I wanted to write, according to Smith, comma, and then provide a quote. Or maybe I want to say, according to Smith, and then paraphrase Smith's words into my own words. You can do this in APA, you just have to make sure you give the rest of the information too. So if you were doing an in-text citation for a quote, you would have to include the name of the author, the date, and then the page or paragraph number. When you're doing it this way and you're writing it into your sentence, you still have to include all the same parts, but they go in slightly different places. First of all, the year, if there is a year, like in this one up here, let's go with the 2018. If there's a year, the year always goes next to the name of the author. So what I would do is I would actually put parentheses right here after Smith's name, 2018. But the page or paragraph number always stays with the quote. So I would actually put that here. So I can write, according to Smith, 2018, give my direct quote, and after the quote, I put the location. Now, if there's no quote and I put it in my own words, I don't need to add this part. I just have to add the year with the author's name. So how you document is up to you. There are different ways of doing it. You can do the in-text citations, or you can write the author's name into the source, into the sentence itself, but then you still have to include the parts that would have been included in the in-text citation. It just depends on what works best for what you're writing to determine how it is best to document it. Okay? So that's the basics when it comes to APA documentation, how to create a website citation for your references page, and also how to do the in-text citation. Now, if you're using a source out of the database, when you do the in-text citations, it's the same rules. So if the database source has one author versus two authors, 3 through 5, 6 or 7, more than 7, you handle all the in-text citations for a database in the exact same way. You just go with the author's rule to create your in-text citations. As always, it's good to have your stuff checked because there are so many rules and can be really easy to mess them up. So don't be afraid to reach out for help or go see a writing tutor on campus.